Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to our panel. We are Outland Entertainment. My name is Tara Cloud-Clark, and I do the marketing for Outland. We'll introduce ourselves real quick.
I'm Jeremy Mohler. I am the founder of Outland Entertainment, the publisher.
I'm Ryan Collins. I think I'm the newest edition. Yeah.
Ryan makes games.
He's a game developer.
Ooh. My name is Christopher Helton, and I am the game director for Outland Entertainment.
Chris also makes games.
And I also make games.
My name is Michael Rookard, and I made this comic right here, and I'm working on a 5th edition supplement.
Role-playing game.
Role-playing.
Yeah.
I forgot my number.
Oh, you gotta wing it.
I'm sorry. I put too much work into this. So Outland Entertainment is a publisher of all kinds of good stuff. We publish books, novels, anthologies, short stories, sci-fi, fantasy, all of this, by the way, comics and graphic novels, and then also games. And that includes board games, card games, RPGs, and the sky's the limit. Outland's focus is transmedia worlds. So we have not just a book or a book series in a world, we'll have books and comics and games and any combination of different media. So one of the things that we wanted to bring to Planet Comicon was talking about how we believe that gameplay is part of storytelling. And it's been a recent push of ours to really bring more games into our publications. So that's what this is about. If we have some time at the end and you have questions, we will open it up for questions. So keep that in mind. Okay, so let's start with Jeremy. He's as he mentioned, he's the founder of Outland Entertainment, and he is also the creative director. So Jeremy, can you kind of go through some of the games that we've developed so far?
So we've got a number of games. The first of our games to come out was Apex Theropod. Any of you familiar with the Apex Theropod deck builder? So what we've done with Apex is we've gone and we've worked on pulling that into some fiction as well as a role-playing game. And if you like dinosaurs, this might be a game for you. You're basically working to become the Apex Predator. And there's 14 different dinosaurs you can play. And so as a deck builder, how many of you are familiar with deck builders? Okay, good. So you know that you don't have to keep buying booster packs for deck builders. Everything comes inside the game box. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between collectible card games and deck builders, right? Then we've also got a couple other games. Althingi, which is a Viking game where the Althingi was a meeting point for the Viking chieftains to meet and work out differences and squabbles and things like that. And it's a quick little 4-player game where you're kind of like representing your clan and going back and forth and working out differences at the Althingi. And then we also have Siege Command, which is our latest game, now currently on Kickstarter. And Ryan will talk more about that, but it's a lane-based strategy game, sort of like a MOBA, I think that's how we describe it.
MOBA-like.
MOBA-like. And then we've also got a couple role-playing games that we've rolled out. So the first role-playing game that we really published is called Toonpunk, and it's sort of it's meant to be a light, not crunchy role-playing game that you can jump into and play really quick. So the book's not huge. It's pretty rules light. It gives you a lot of room for storytelling, which we like. We like storytelling. And then we've also got Rogues, which is also a more like specific campaign or setting, I should say. A setting.
Would you like me to explain this?
I mean, it's a setting. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, go ahead.
Toonpunk, we call it's a rules minimal role-playing game. Basically, it gives you the minimum of what you need for a role-playing game, and the idea is that you will kind of just develop the rest through play. And then Rogues is a supplement that gives you more information about rogues in your Toonpunk games.
And the thing about Rogues is we have 3 anthologies of short stories, and the concept is like focusing on those characters that aren't like good people, but they're not necessarily all bad. So they're called scoundrels, brigands, knaves, that sort of thing. So we had those 3 anthologies, and we created a role-playing game so you can read those anthologies, and then you can kind of make your own character that's similar to that world. So the cool thing about the Toonpunk is that we can apply that to multiple worlds. Or if you have your own world that isn't one of ours, you can apply the Toonpunk system to that.
Yeah, that's actually one of our principles going forward in the development of role-playing games, is that the games are intended to support your stories and the kind of settings that you might want to have, rather than having their own built-in settings. And they will also, like with the Rogues book, they will support other settings that we publish in other media so that you can explore those worlds in your games.
So as I mentioned before, Outland is developing worlds with lots of different types of media. And sometimes we start with a book, like with Viking Verse. We started with 2 novels. We now have 4 comics with it. We have an Old Norse for Modern Times phrase book, which is super cool. And then we're developing RPGs for that. But sometimes we start with the game first, and which leads me to Ryan Collins, the developer of Siege Command. We started with his game. Again, that is on Kickstarter. I've got a QR code in the box. I'll pull that out later. Ryan, you want to kind of give us a brief description of Siege Command and then where we're going with it, with the world?
Sure. Yeah, so as Jeremy said, it's a 2-player lane-based strategy game. It's inspired by MOBAs. That's where I started with it, trying to emulate that, and it ended up being something completely different, but still reminiscent of that. There's 4 lanes on the battlefield. You're trying to get units down those lanes, capture the turret in each one, and if you're lucky enough to get a unit all the way to the other side of the battlefield, it does damage to the wall as well. There's cool spells you can throw in there to bolster your units or damage other ones on the battlefield, neutralize a turret, all sorts of cool stuff. Where we're going specifically with that game, as Tara mentioned, it is live on Kickstarter. And also on the Kickstarter, the first expansion is also available. It introduces 3 new tribes that bring asymmetry to the game, as well as introducing mechanics and some new optional layers of complexity that you can add. So one of my favorite things about the game is the fact that about how modular it is. So there's a quick play variant where you can take out some of the rules and teach it to somebody really quickly. If you just have 25-30 minutes, you can play that way, or you can add more layers of complexity on as you see fit. And with future expansions, there are at least 2 more planned that will each introduce 3 more tribes and more mechanics that you can add on additional complexity and really just create your own custom game with whatever parts of those expansions you want to add on.
And so we're expanding this world through transmedia. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So through transmedia with Siege Command, and so Siege Command is based in the world of Kinterlands. If you want to learn more about that, there's more info on the Kickstarter. But also, the first issue of the first comic series is being released in that Kickstarter as well, Kinterlands Conclave. And it allows you to explore the world a little bit more, introduce you to the various tribes that populate the world, and start to kind of get more interested in that. That kind of arc is going to be wrapped up through another 2 issues coming out after that. There's plans for more comics after that. Working on an original RPG system, possibly more games, brainstorming some short stories to collaborate with some other authors for short story anthologies. So a lot of stuff in the world to expand on that world through transmedia.
And then, so sometimes we start with a game to develop a world of transmedia. And then sometimes we start with a comic. For instance, we have Michael Rookard, the developer of the Galefire. And I just want to know, we're not really just pitching all of our products right now. I've just got to give you a background before we can get into the meat of this panel. So, Michael, if you'll describe Galefire to us and then talk about, you were in the earliest stages of developing an RPG. Talk about, just briefly about that.
Yeah, so Galefire is a science fiction, fantasy kind of mashup with airships and giant monsters and all kinds of stuff that I'd like to think about and create. And
Michael's an artist, and he's concepted and created all this stuff and built his world.
yeah, so we've got all kinds of pieces for the world that I've got a pretty big world document that I've shared with the game designers that has all the species, and nation states, and regions, and monsters, and demons, and weapons, and airships, and all this stuff. So I make all these things, and hopefully we can find rules with the game designer to make it possible to jump out of an airship and land on top of a giant monster. Because that's what I want. Because that's not something you can do in 5th edition.
That's all he wants out of this game.
Yeah, that's it. So a way to do that would be great. So we're looking for stylish kind of action to kind of bolt on top of 5th edition, because the world itself, you can interact with it pretty well with like kind of the different species and monsters and stuff that I've already made. Kind of slots into working with 5th edition. And got a bunch of different areas that are themed differently, so we can tell all sorts of stories, like different stories in different regions that have kind of different flavors. Let the players explore this world that I think is super cool, because I wouldn't be writing it if I didn't.
Okay, so we like games, in case you didn't notice. Not only do we have game developers on here, but Jeremy, Chris, and I, we are gamers as well. And as Jeremy mentioned, Chris also develops games. But we aren't just doing this because we want to make games. We really do believe this is part of the storytelling process. And it's really cool because our fans, our readers, our audience, they get to tell their own stories in this world. So it's a more immersive medium than a lot of times than a novel or a comic is, because you can create it alongside with us even. We kind of create the foundation, and then other people can build off of that in different ways. And we've introduced you to some of the games that we already have in development. Another one that we have right now, it's even a little more different, and it is very much collaborative storytelling. So it's an RPG that doesn't have the dice rolls. It has another mechanic that supplements that, but it's much more heavy storytelling than anything. It's called Negocios Infernales, and I do have postcards for that too if you're interested in that. But let's get into it. Let's talk about how games are storytelling. Now the one I just mentioned, that's obvious because we're literally telling, the players literally telling their own stories. So that's obvious. But what might not be as obvious, like Ryan has been demoing Siege Command at our booth all weekend. It's been really awesome actually. Is it may not be as obvious how that is storytelling. So Ryan, can you give us an account of when Angie and Avi played and how that was a story?
Yeah, so we actually got really good video capture of that we'll be uploading later, so you can all experience it for yourself. But it was, Siege Command creates these opportunities for you to really create, while it doesn't necessarily a two-player strategy game isn't the best venue for storytelling. For an existing story, you can't really dive into lore too much other than just reading what we've included in the rulebook. But it does allow you to create your own stories just by experiencing this intense tug of war and being able to kind of customize the battlefield, customize the game however you want, and kind of create this own story. Because the base game for Siege Command is recounting these battles that would happen every 6 years between these two tribes over this fertile land that is in between their territories, and it's been going on for such a long time, and you can kind of create your own version of what that would be like. So just things like in the very last minute pulling out all the stops and just turning the tables when they least expect it. It creates really good opportunities for that and create your own stories, not just in imagining how it would be in that world, but also just cool stories to tell your friends about how you whooped your friend's butt.
Yeah, there's two sides of it. In this one particular game, one of the great mechanics that I like in Ryan's game is that as you get weaker, you get advantages. So you get to spend more energy, you get first turn. or get to determine who takes the first turn. Angie, which is Jeremy's sister-in-law, she was almost dead, and Avi was not. Like, she was pretty far from it, and so we just assumed Angie was going to die. But Angie was able to make very strategic moves. She took a long time thinking about it, so there's a little bit of suspense there too. That's what we'll call it. It was a little annoying, especially since we were recording. But that time invested was important because she was able to pull out cards that created a lot of tension, and she came back and ended up tying.
Yeah, ended in a
Which
draw.
has its own dramatic thing about it. I'm going to take a poll because there's more people here. If you like a game that can end in a tie, raise your hand. If you do not like the idea that the game could end in a tie, raise your hand. There's less of us. Yeah, I like to win or
Well,
lose.
fortunately, it's not super common, so it's
not.
one of those rare cases where like everybody was very satisfied with it.
It was. So in this particular story, that was a game. It was exciting because they both, tied. They didn't both lose.
They both won.
But so it was really tense. It was awesome to watch. It was like an immersive experience. It was not just. I mean, it was closer to a sport than anything. But it was part of the storytelling. But then the bragging rights afterwards, you see Angie, she's like, and I was here, and they were there, and then it went bam. It was, she not only was in the story of Kinterland and Siege Command, but she also had her own story that she could take away from it. So that's like kind of that double opportunity with that. So Michael, on the other side of it, again, he's an artist, and that's his thing. He doesn't write games, yet, at least. And two, he's developed this world, and then he has to give it to a writer. So he's already mentioned some of the elements, but can you talk a little bit about, like, when you're thinking about the people who are going to be playing your game and who are going to be telling these new stories in your world? Like, and I'm sorry I didn't prepare you for this. You're like, oh.
Deer in the headlights.
Trying to
You didn't tell me
my
your
answer as you're asking me the question.
You always give good answers, so I trust you. So, when you think about, like, anybody in this audience playing your game, like what are the types of things that you're trying to keep in mind when developing that? And I can go to Chris, I'm sure.
No, I can answer that. So, I've played 5th edition quite a bit, and I have certain. I kind of don't like sometimes how the combat is paced. I feel like it takes too long to really get to a point where you can really resolve combat in like a cool and stylish way. And sometimes I don't even think you really can do that because I was playing fighter, and every time I wanted to do something really cool that I would try to describe to my dungeon master, he would just say, "Okay, well, roll your attack dice." I'm like, well, can I do something else and get like an advantage or something? But no, that was not allowed. So I'm hopeful that when we start working with the game designer, we can figure out some interesting mechanics to put into the game that will allow people to kind of execute maybe stuff that is a little bit outside the box of just rolling your attack.
More creative.
Yeah, like being more creative with what you want to do, and maybe get some bonuses for it.
So what I like about that is because with D&D, I agree with you. Like, you roll in, it's almost like you've got this cool storytelling that you can do as much as you want, but then you have to kind of do the actual game. But then you can do more storytelling, as opposed to some of the things that we're doing is that's more intertwined with each other. Like, it's less stopping and starting between story and gameplay. So
well, if you're letting the characters tell you how they want to do this awesome maneuver, that's them also kind of storytelling for their character in the game, and it's not just the DM storying.
Telling you no.
yeah.
Let the dice decide.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So Chris is our director for game development. Chris, do you want to talk to us about some of the things that we're trying to do with our storytelling in our games, as opposed to making, I mean, we talked about Toonpunk, we're wanting to use Toonpunk in different worlds, but we're also wanting to provide a variety of experiences outside of just one engine. Can you kind of talk about the things that we're looking for as far as the mechanics and the experiences in relation to storytelling?
We've got a number of systems that we are going to. I think the best way to approach developing a game is to think about what you want to do first, and then figure out what would be the best system that you could use to support that. Or in the case of Michael, it's, you know, how can we adapt that system to make it support what he wants to do with it. So I think, you know, just trying to fit everything into one game ends up getting, you get a kind of a monotonous experience, I think, because whether you realize it or not, you start to look at everything in the same way. And by having, you know, letting the experience that you want as your end result guide your system choices, and you end up, I think, with better games that way. And you can't be afraid to, you know, make changes or add things or take things away to better support the experience that you're looking for.
So we're talking a lot about RPGs, and that's really easy to do as far as storytelling goes, but just in our games in general. So, and I play a lot of games, and one of the things I hate is when you've got a game and it's got a theme, but the theme really isn't related to the theme. So like, for instance, am I allowed to talk about other people's stuff? Don't tell me.
We're not making money off
This is being recorded.
You're sending it to me.
You're saying positive things about other people's games.
I wouldn't say negative things about someone
It's
else's.
not a negative, it's just a preference.
Unless it's D&D, you can say negative things about D&D.
I'm gonna go for it. So the game Codenames, I think it's a great game it's word-based and all of that, and it's got this spy theme to it, and they make it work, but I don't feel like it feeds it. One of the things I love about what we do is that we have this world, and the game is going to reflect the world. So if we wanted a spy game, we're gonna have more deception and, just different types of elements to it. As opposed to, hey, we've got this word game, let's throw a theme on it. Like that's what I think we try to avoid, because again, we want the immersive experience. We want our audience to be involved in the world and help build this world in different ways.
That's actually one of the reasons why I knew that Outland was going to be a perfect fit for Siege Command and World of Hinterlands, is because a lot of bigger publishers will just buy a design from someone and then slap on whatever IP they want onto that. They'll just shoehorn the theme into the game.
Yeah.
Where I knew that Outland really wants to take these worlds and expand on them, and not just take the game design, but invite the whole world into the family. So
I think it's important to design the game in a way that works with the intellectual property.
yeah,
And Outland is very, 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 very loyal to the creators. They want to make sure that they have the decisions, that they get the credit for it, that they own it. It's creator owned IPs, and we have very few exceptions, but so we want to make sure that these worlds stay with the God who created, or goddess. The goddess is here, so in general. Anyway, so we'll open the floor to some questions, unless you guys have anything else you want to talk about regarding storytelling and games.
I think some back and forth would be good.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Out of curiosity, what all RP games or tabletop games y'all started off with?
Like we played ourselves, like other people's games.
Yeah, like y'all started off with
Like
that
entry
you know you wanted to be dragged in deeper into the tabletop world.
I'll go first because mine's pretty simple. I grew up on them. My parents played a lot of games with me, and I feel like it was an education thing. And so I was introduced to the new world of games, you know, beyond Scrabble and Monopoly, about 10 years ago, and I've just been gradually building it. But Catan at that time was really popular. I'm not saying it's the best game, I do still love it, but it was a great gateway game for me.
I think Catan was a gateway for me too, I'll be honest.
We're like, yeah.
Yeah, no, I like Catan. I mean, it doesn't get a lot of play anymore because we've moved on to other games, but we go back to it, and we've got friends who we've introduced them to Catan, and that's all they play now is Catan. I mean, there's a big. Everybody starts with the traditional Sorry, you know, Monopoly, the board games that you pick up as kids. I mean, we used to play Risk every New Year's Eve, and I would always lose because dice and me don't get along. But yeah, how about you?
Yeah, originally for me it was Magic the Gathering. That then in that circle of friends, someone introduced me to Catan, and I don't play Catan anymore because I don't like fighting with my friends. And I think part of your question was also including role-playing games. So 3.5 D&D was my first intro to role-playing games, and then 5th edition, then Fiasco, Rifts, Fate, Apocalypse World, all sorts of good stuff. And now I'm playing more role-playing type of role-playing games that are less action-oriented, more storytelling, just to get more inspiration to work on my RPG and expand on that too.
Yes.
So as the old person on this panel, I in 5th grade, my family moved around a lot when I was a kid. So in 5th grade, we moved to a new school, and I think I'd been there a week, and this kid that I had made friends with came up to me on the recess yard during lunch and said, "Hey, have you heard of this game called D&D?" And that was 1979.
I was born that year.
See?
So that you were.
So I was 11 years old, and that's what started me down this path.
Cool. I started with Warhammer 40K.
Oh, that too.
What made you fall in love with games? I'm assuming you fell in love with games.
Well, I've always been a big gamer all the time, but I think, oddly enough, all the games I played on console or whatnot, I'm like, if I wanted to learn the controllers, I did fighting games, but other than that, most of my video games, when I stopped to look at them, they're all RPG games, and when I got into college, somebody's like, "Oh, D&D, I only played it like once, and after that everybody got busy, and then I just picked up D&D just some years back ago, and I can't stop. I just can't stop playing, and I only DM once, but it's hard for me to usually go off the stories they give you, so I usually make up a whole story and adventure my whole head.
You should, if you haven't already, you should start reading other engines, like Comicon, for instance, that are a base, and build off of those. You might actually find more freedom with those as far as your own storytelling goes.
Cool.
It's a good strong start to storytelling too.
Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Well, what do you want to hear about?
Yes, sir.
When you go about designing a game, what's your first major step?
So the question was that when you start going about designing a game, what's your first major step?
Yeah.
Usually prototyping. You'll typically start with just an idea of what kind of game you want to accomplish, what kind of mechanics you want to involve in that, and it really just goes from concept directly to prototyping. And that prototype can be just a spreadsheet, or it can be printing out just things on paper or writing on pieces of paper and tearing it out and making the pieces. And and then just seeing if it works. And then if it works, then you see how fun that is, and then you can adapt that and work on that, bring in other people, get more opinions, and then just keep building on that until you got something solid.
And that's directly in line with what Carlos Hernandez and CSE Cooney, who the one RPG I was telling, the storytelling based one, that's exactly what they were telling me earlier today, is that you got an idea, like you said, how you want something to work, make a prototype for it, test it, and then find out what works. So.
You will throw away a lot of prototypes, or just put them on the shelf and then come back to them later.
Recycle.
Not every prototype is an immediate win.
Chris, do you have anything?
For role-playing games, for me, I think it depends on what I'm going to end up doing, because like I've got currently the 2 games in development here with Outland, one of which is intended to be kind of a generic system, and my other game is a paranormal romance game, so I kind of had different starting points for each of those because they kind of, they're going to support different types of stories. So I had to think about, what kind of mechanics are going to support the kinds of stories I want to tell.
Yeah, so I mean, I think to what the point that Chris is making is that sometimes you have to have an idea for a story that you want to tell, and then that kind of helps inform the rules that you want to develop.
I started with the setting.
Yeah, or even world building like that. Starting with the setting and then building the game out of the setting, because that's going to dictate what kind of rules that you go with. Like Chris was talking about.
So it sounds like what you're saying is you could start anywhere.
Yeah, because I mean, like with me, the only real commonality in the 2 games I'm working on is that both of them are intended to be settings that are, to have settings that are either come from external of the game or are developed by the group as they play. Like my paranormal romance game, the first session, you make your characters and you, as a group, start to develop the world that you're going to be exploring through the game. You decide what kind of setting you want, what type of characters are going to be in it, and then the rest just kind of emerges through play.
I don't know, did that answer your question, or is that a little too ambiguous?
No, that answers the question, yes.
Because I think, Ryan, did you build the IP around the game you designed?
So with Kinderlands, I started with a game design, and I hadn't really developed the world yet until I commissioned someone to build out some prototype artwork to like kind of build a sell sheet and like reach out to publishers. And at that point, like just the artwork that he was giving me just sparked this world that I then in my head started to create. And I actually made some changes to the game that fit that world even better, so that it wouldn't be just like slapping on a feed. But yeah, like with board game and tabletop design, usually it starts with designing a prototype. But absolutely, like they were saying with role-playing games, like with my role-playing system, like I'm starting with the world and then figuring, like I have the world already, so I'm figuring out how to make the ideal experience for players to play within that world and create their own stories. So,
Yeah, another question. Go ahead.
I was wondering, by any chance, when y'all started creating your games and whatnot, did y'all get like a degree or a background in it?
No.
Play lots of games. No, and this kind of goes back to your question about where to start with developing games. Play lots of games. Figure out what you like, what mechanics you like. If it's a worker placement game, or if it's a deck builder, or if it's a role-playing game. I mean, there's a lot of different types of games out there, and that can be a place to start too, is by deciding on what kind of mechanics in the game you find enjoyable. And you don't need you don't need a degree to do this.
There aren't a lot of degrees in game development yet.
I mean, for video games, there are a lot of degrees, but as far
There's
as
a lot
board
of the
games,
same characteristics for that. So. No, actually, Jeremy, you've got an art degree.
Yeah.
and Ryan's in audio engineering, right?
Literature.
Literature and
Graphic design.
yeah, so we've got a variety here. But what Jeremy was saying, like the games that you play, like think about your favorite games, or even your least favorite games. Any of the games that you play, that's what I mean. Your favorite parts of it, like what makes it so good, or what is the best part of that game. Like think about that and kind of like go through a lot of different games and pull out things that you like about that game and see where the commonalities are, and then just be like, I love. Okay, so like my favorite game is Dead of Winter, and I love that Dead of Winter has so many goals to keep in mind. It has a goal for the whole game, it has a goal for each hand, it has a goal for each round, it has a goal for each person. Like I love that there are a lot of those goals that you have to reach. I love that. So if I were developing a game, I would want to think about that, maybe not as much as Outland does, but like I would want to think about, okay, how can I make all of these goals fit together for people? So that they're clashing and sometimes you're aligned and sometimes you're opposed, even to the game itself. So that's what I would do. Just look at the elements that you like and then try to figure something out.
In most cases, gameplay mechanics can't be trademarked or copyrighted. Combinations of them can be, and
The expression.
and in some cases they can be, but shamelessly imitate and adapt. Like take those ideas that you like, make them work in a way that you like, and put them together and create your own game, your own experience.
Use it as inspiration.
And honestly, it doesn't matter if you copy somebody else's stuff until you want to publish it. But if you just want to play it yourself with your friends, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
But when you go to publish it, that's when you need to talk to experts and make sure that what you're doing is not illegal or really expensive. Good question. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
As an artist myself, I love world building and I love lore. You feel like you have to strike a balance between overloading players with too much lore versus the game mechanics, or what's the balance there when you're trying to build a game?
Good question. So he said he's an artist and he loves creating lore and the world building. And so the question is, how do you balance out that with the game mechanics, making sure there's not too much. Does anybody have anything specific they want to say about that?
As to say, I do think it's as possible to overwhelm players with the lore as it is with it. I think actually it's easier probably to overwhelm them with the lore than it is with the mechanics. And I think that can sometimes be a higher bar to entry than having a really complicated game, because, I mean, you can pick up eventually, how the mechanics work, but if, nobody wants a quiz before they have to figure out how to play a game.
Right.
So it's a matter of finding the right entry point and then expanding on it as you go, rather than just going, oh, here's the lore.
Yeah.
And then, 300 pages later, you get to the game itself.
Right.
I would argue, as a game player, because I haven't developed my own one, but I would argue that having an optional choice would be important. So for instance, the Discworld game, if you've read Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, first of all, there's 40 books, and there is a lot of stuff in there, a lot of characters. And I haven't read all of them, I don't know all the characters, I don't know all the lore. And so playing the Discworld game, like if I have to go to the game and know all that stuff to enjoy the game, it's not a good game. I'm sorry, that doesn't work. But that is a good game because I can go to it, I don't have to know everything. It's still got that quirkiness that's Terry Pratchett, but I can enjoy the game because it has great mechanics. However, I do identify some of the characters, some of the locations, and so that makes it even more fun for me. And the more I read Pratchett's Discworld, the more I can enjoy the game. So I would argue that when building a game, that you need to have a compromise where you can do a lot of lore. And one of the benefits of Outland's transmedia worlds is that we can have that lore outside of the game, but we need to make sure that the games are playable even if you don't. And we want to think of them as an entryway too into that world. Every piece of transmedia in our world is an entry into that world so that you can experience it in different ways too.
If you're doing a game that adapts a book or a comic or a movie or something like that, you should always assume that the people, playing that aren't going to be experts in that. That you should assume that the game will be their entry into the world rather than necessarily the world being their entry into the game.
I think also having the lore developed in the background, like I think Michael mentioned the World Bible that he created for Galefire. He's got that World Bible, but we don't have to dump all that content into the game. Right. But it's good for us to know what all that is so that we can design the game and the elements of the game.
Because it can inform choices.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's just a balance in terms of what you put in the game, not necessarily what you have to use to develop the game.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Outland can put out a whole bunch of different content, a whole bunch of media telling about the Galefire world, but until he releases his Cimmerillion, no one will know everything.
Right.
Oh,
It's the World Bible.
And also, just to follow up on that question too, you usually want to expect that players won't care about the world playing the game. The game should be good
Right.
by itself, regardless of the world.
Sure.
And I mean, I'm guilty of buying games just because they look cool, or because like I'm interested in the world, and I'll still pull them out and like tell people to play them, hope people enjoy it.
Yeah.
But like maybe the mechanics aren't that great,
Sure.
but I like the world.
Right.
And vice versa. I've got great games that just are just very bland, don't have much depth to them thematically. So
yes.
Do you think a slice of life tabletop game would work at all? Like with the lore storytelling aspect that you guys talk about?
could you repeat that, please?
A slice of life. She's
Yeah.
asking if a slice of life game work,
Oh,
right? Is that?
Yeah, with like.
that's actually one of my white whales is I would love to one day to do a slice of life role playing game. So if you want to write a slice of life role playing game, then talk to me afterwards.
Are you talking about a role playing game or a board game, or either?
Whatever.
Any kind of game?
You just want to play a game. That's slice of life. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a genre that I think is really underrepresented in games, and it's something. My favorite kinds of fiction and comics are slice of life stories. They might get weird sometimes, but I love slice. I was just recently talking to a friend of mine and saying that I wish I could figure out the best way to do a slice of life role playing game that wasn't just like a couple of people sitting in front of journals or something like that. But yeah, I would love. I think that's a dramatically underrepresented and untapped area of games. So. Like I said, I'm serious. If you're interested, talk to me. Talk to me after the panel.
I think a lot of it depends on the rules and the mechanics, because that's gonna. I'm trying to think. Like a lot of times, a game will attract you to be based on the IP or the visual aesthetic or the look of it, and you're right. I can't even think of a single slice of life type of game.
Yeah, that means that
it needs to be done.
Yeah. It's a you can't even really call it a genre. I mean, I'm not sure what you would, but that sort of storytelling is, it's all over the place in movies, in books, in comics, and it needs more games. So.
That was a great question. One of the things we've loved about being at Comicon, so we are all over the world actually. All of our artists and creators and our staff, most of us haven't met in person. So several of us were able to make it to this Comicon. Some of us are fairly local. I'm in Arkansas, so it's just 3 hours away. But and like Michael and Ryan and Jeremy are all local. But Chris is from Florida, and we've got Shannon from
Spokane,
Washington. We had Chuck. He's not here right now, but he's from Maryland. And we're able to come together. I can't remember where I was going with that. Sorry, lost it. It's late. It's day 3. It's the end of day 3.
You made it, everyone.
Oh, but having these conversations and kind of being able to talk creatively and coming up with ideas, and then like we're coming out of this weekend with some projects, right, Shannon?
Oh,
We got this one
Rock-Billy
project we're
Werewolf.
really excited about. Okay, he didn't look excited, so I thought maybe he couldn't remember.
I'm tired.
But that's a great question, and I think you sparked some interesting.
And I was very serious of you.
For the third time.
Yeah, for the third time, in case my enthusiasm for that subject matter didn't come through.
Any other questions?
You got us here. We're a captive audience.
Yes.
Wonder if you ever played Bureaucracy, a game by Douglas Adams.
I have Bureaucracy. Has anybody played Bureaucracy
I've
by
even heard
Douglas
of it.
Adams?
I mean, Douglas Adams,
I mean,
obviously.
you mentioned the slice of life, and it's sort of follows his comedy, but basically it's, I believe it's taking out alone as the basis of the game.
Really?
Computer aspect.
So do you get denied over and over again?
That sounds great. At least you
Sounds like life.
I that's when I was 12 and lost it, but
Also,
I bet that's worth money now.
older game. Interesting. No, I have to look it up. I've not heard of that.
I've heard of it, but I've never seen it.
Any other questions? Yeah. Wait. Can I get hers first? Yes.
As with both game players and game developers, what advice do you have for someone who's newer into the role-playing side of things, how to get, I guess, better at tabletop role-playing?
So the question is, for someone who's new, if I understood correctly, for someone who's new at role-playing games, how can you get better at it, you said? So do you mean like from just a playing or like a DM type of role or both? Okay.
Practice.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the easiest thing. If you, and the other thing is,
Is practice?
absorb a lot of stories.
Yeah.
Watch a lot of movies, read books, read comics, whatever. Watch a lot of TV shows. See how, and when you see somebody that's doing something that you think is a good idea, like how they portray a character or how they open up a scene, kind of take note of that mentally or physically, and then figure out how you can implement that sort of thing into your play. But I mean, the biggest thing is just practice. The more you do it, it's like a muscle or a musical instrument or painting, and the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Practice sounds like work. Practice sounds like work.
Take
So I think-
inspiration from things you love.
I think what Chris is saying
And
is
slice
just
of
do
life.
it.
Yeah.
If you like playing the games, just play them.
Yeah.
And the more you play them and have fun doing it, the more easier it's going to get as you keep playing.
And as just a corollary to what Jeremy just said, just talking about fun. If you're having fun, if the people at the table, whatever game you're playing, if the people at the table are having fun, you're not doing it wrong.
Yeah, true.
If you're having
Even
fun,
if you're doing it wrong, if you're
I
having
mean, that's honestly more important than the games themselves. No offense to
No,
any game designers. But yeah, if you guys are having fun, you're obviously doing something right. So
I would say too, with Carlos Hernandez and CSE Cooney's Negocios Infernales, we've been doing play testing, and the first time it was really awkward for us to play it because we weren't really sure. And we've talked about that with this game and how we can make people more comfortable getting into it. And so they're actually putting in these kind of affirmations, like there's no wrong answer. It's okay to fail. Failing is fun. Things like I am a creative person. Like I know that sounds silly. In fact, I hate affirmations. I love them. They're great. They work. But I also like ugh. But like you do need to tell yourself that like it's okay to copy someone. You're just playing around, right? That's okay. It's okay to, and this is in role-playing games specifically, it's okay to be dumb. It's okay to not have the best answer, the best character, the best, move or whatever. Like all of that's okay. Like just be creative. And I would argue just being creative in lots of areas in your life would help you in anything, really. So.
Yeah, I'd also recommend checking out some role-playing systems that are less heavy on the rules and mechanics and have more emphasis on the role-playing and just the acting and having fun and playing out the scene. Like Fiasco is a great one. There's no DM, there's nobody telling you what you need to do. You just go through and you're creating the settings, you're creating the stories, you're playing together. And especially doing that with a group of people you're comfortable with, like doing that a few times and getting to just pretend to be someone else, or to create character voices and everything with people that you know you're comfortable with. That'll help you like kind of build up what you need to kind of bring that to the table.
And there's excuse me, a thing in role-playing that has really caught on in the last few years, and that is kind of correlated to what you just said. It's they're called safety tools, and there's a number of different types of tools out there, and it's basically things that you can do to make sure that everyone in the group is on the same page,
Like
and
establishing
you're not.
rules, like we're not going to talk about this, and,
Right.
and we're
Let's
not
not.
going to use
Yeah.
this kind of.
I use.
Chris, I'm sorry. We're about out of time. No, I'm sorry. We'll be here if you want to talk afterwards. But I want to.
Just not Chris.
We have something really important to talk about, and it's you.
Me.
Yeah, I just want you to talk about this certain thing. So we are continuing to develop games in the established worlds that we have, and then creating new worlds within Outland Entertainment. And you, as the director of game development, and Jeremy is the director of the company, of course, what types of things are we looking for when people approach you with games, with pitches for games?
Slice of life.
Okay. No, but what if somebody isn't doing slice of life?
What if you have a game that you want to pitch to me, what I'm looking for is that it's something that the people playing it are going to have a good time, and that you can engage in some form of storytelling, and that's it. Those are the two most important things for me, and then we can work from there.
We also like games that have opportunity for expansion.
And that.
Nice way to put that.
That could be, so kind of back to transmedia, we're looking for games and projects that are possible to expand to other forms of transmedia. So something that might work really fun as a comic, or something that might work really good as a novel, or with a component that works in there. I also really like games that are done.
Yes. So if you do have a game you want to pitch, maybe we can give you some advice, but the way that we approach it is like, it needs to be done. Like, at least as much done as you can do. If you're not an artist, but you've got the concept, you got everything, all the other pieces, that's fine. We can find a good artist. But, yeah. So if there are any game developers, feel free to come talk to us. We can give you our contact, or if we have time, we might be able to talk to you.
Out of curiosity, how many of you are actually developing a game right now? I mean, you're making a game that you want other people to play.
Cool. Yeah.
So 3 people.
I'd encourage any of you who'd like to play games to do what I said. Think about the mechanics that you like, or a story that you like, a story idea, and see how you can make it into a game. Because games, this is a silver age, if not a golden age. So.
Golden age. I'm pretty sure it's a golden age.
Bringing about a golden age. What's that? For transmedia storytelling.
That'd be a platinum age.
Okay. So, thank you all for attending our panel on the last panel on the last day of Planet Comicon. I hope you've had a great weekend. I would tell you to come to our booth, but I don't think you're allowed to.
No,
So,
we still got time. It's only 4:30.
for the booth?
Come try out the Siege Command demo.
At 5.
Oh, so come to our booth. I'm sorry.
It's right under the aisle 1600.
We are right under the 1600 banner. And it's a damn sexy booth, so it's pretty easy to identify, and we'll be up there as soon as we can. Or you can come up, make sure you've got the free previews. We've got more Galefire up there at the booth if you need one. We've got games for sale, books, anthologies, short stories, comics, all of that. Come say hi to us, keep talking to us if you want, etc. So,
Yep, thank you.
enjoy the rest of the conference.